have with us the very suave Mr. Puran Kumar, who's the principal at Studio PK, and he's somebody who believes in creating spaces that exude a strong sense of place and identity. And with more than 25 years into practice, he continues to explore as well as adopt fresh and innovative and exciting new ways of breathing life into the wide gamut of projects that have come his way. So ladies and gentlemen, I think it's time to invite on stage our very, very fantastic session moderator and speaker himself. Please put your hands together to welcome on stage the principal at Studio PKA, Mr. Puran Kumar.
Thank you very much for being in this hall, a creative hall, shall I say. We were here last year and we kickstarted something as a discussion, as a thought, as an exchange of ideas, an exchange of perspectives. And we are back here in order to possibly go a little deeper, possibly try and see if there's meaning about what we do. We all are busy creating designs and putting things together, building. But is there a thought that's there behind and we don't speak about it, or we don't share it among us, or is it something that we don't get a chance to express about? This is the forum where we thought we could try and express something out of that. So let's go back to the basic instinct that a human being has of telling a story, also of listening to a story. The very idea of human beings wanting to communicate and tell a story through what they do and what they believe in is an age-old thing. I'm going to try and sum this up very quickly in the next 5-7 minutes to see that we understand what we are here to speak about. And I have some very learned, some very elite, I call them the Savvy Six, the panelists that we have today, who I'll be inviting after that, and we'll have an engaging session with you where we are going to invite your thoughts in every section as we go along, as Kavya has already told you that. Okay, moving on. The need to communicate, the need to tell a story. Cave age, cave paintings, telling stories all the time about what you did and what you managed. Or going further down the civilizations, there could be hieroglyphics, there would be carvings, there would be stones, there'll be plates where you could inscribe what you wanted to convey and tell a story. We've lived through those civilizations to the modern type setting where you had the idea of telling a story going beyond one-on-one to a mass communication objective. If you see here, this is just the beginning of how we could tell a story and have millions of people or hundreds of thousands of people take that from you. So it's just to say that we are done with writing. At some point, we're done with writing in the books. We could possibly go on to make a press and actually have the content that you put together go across to masses. You could have theories like the Big Bang being explained. There are theories and there are myths, but through a story you could have the theory come across to the people in no time as the art of storytelling grew, as the art of storytelling actually went beyond a certain limitation. Human beings have always told their histories and truths through parable and fable. We are innovated storytellers. I don't know how many of you agree with this, but this is one of the thoughts, this is one of the theories, this is one of the schools of thought. Stories like Stonehenge, where there may have been a story, there may have been many stories, we don't know. There's a certain mystery, there's a certain intrigue about that this structure, when we get down to seeing this or perceiving it or visiting it, actually unfolds. And then, we don't know whether we want to mess our minds, so that's one of the thoughts, that you could just leave it as that and not bother. The whole idea of storytelling percolates down to music, to movies and to entertainment, and the whole the entire perspective about getting a story through how it's being conveyed to you can vary in various forms. Come down to, you all have it with you today. So a smartphone, an iPhone, or the medium. Now this is a communicator. It communicates very quickly, just puts a story together, and it communicates to whoever you want it to be conveyed to. And then I have another take on this, that it's a story in itself. The very design, the very idea of something like this is a story in itself, which is a design but a story. So I do not know where am I on the design or on the story? Our day-to-day utility items, whether it is the paper clip or even something like the toothpick, there is a certain design involved in there, there is a certain thought that's gone in there, and there is a certain perspective that you have about how you use something like this from utility perspective and from the designer's perspective. But each one of these things has a certain story. Each one of these designs has a certain story. And then we are designers, we are architects, we build. And so we build with a brick. We've all heard it, learned it, read it somewhere. Every brick has a story. Every brick wants to be something. Louis Kahn said that. There's a story behind every brick, the way it's put together, and it conveys something to you. Let's try and explore as to what's your story today. I think each one of us need to go into ourselves and figure out what's our story. When we are designing, when we are sitting down to design, what's it that we are doing? Is there any story? Is there nothing that we have as narrative? Is it a process that unfolds by itself? Or there is a certain process that's already preconceived and we just go as per that? That's what we are going to do today. And to do that and to share that with me, I'm going to have 6 very eminent architects and designers present in this hall as my panel today. And we're going to call them up as we go forward. But before that, they're not strangers.
Hi, my name is Dean. I run a multidisciplinary firm called Mosaic.
This is Shabnam Gupta. I have a design studio by the name of The Orange Lane.
My name is Arjun Malik. I work at Malik Architecture with my father.
I am Salman Gandhi, principal at SRPC Architects.
My name is Architect Bahar Faki and I'm from Faki and Associates India.
2017 is an important year because it marks 40 years of me being involved in architecture.
We are a bunch of designers that like to think that we are innovators.
Each project is a tale by itself.
We pretty much work on any aspect of design.
Urban design, large-scale housing townships, architecture of various typologies, including education, recreation.
Guys, can you please put your hands together for the panel? Thank you so very much. I'm going to call each one of them one by one and then we can get the discussion started. Arjun, could you please come up? Please invite Arjun Malik to the stage. Welcome. How are you doing? Yes, please. Bahar. So the order is alphabetical, it's in no order of preference. Thank you very much. Bahar, please can you join us. Guys, can you keep the applause going for the panelists? They really have taken time and effort to be here amongst you. Thank you. Thanks, Bahar. Dean, could you please come up? Thank you, Dean De Cruz, all the way from Goa, guys. Mr. De Cruz. All right. Next up, we have Salil ran the way of SRNA. Salil from Bombay. Salil, could you please join us? Wonderful to see you here. Fantastic. Please take that. Shabnam Gupta of the Orange Lane. Thank you for being here, Shabnam. Thank you very much. Wonderful to see you this morning. Fantastic. And we have Somitro. Last but not the least, Somitro from Bangalore. Somitro Ghosh from Matthew and Ghosh. Somitro, wonderful to see you again.
Sorry, Puran, I don't want to hijack this, but guys, can you turn the lights down? Otherwise, I'm going to have to be like Mr. Bartley Boy and wear my glares.
It's blinding.
So,
it's
please do
blinding.
something with this. Yeah, we can't see anything.
So, All right. Is that good? Yeah, that's better. Okay, thank you. Thanks very much, Savvy 6. I'm going to keep referring that on and off. The Savvy 6 because we actually saw this panel with the people who you have over here for the kind of subject that we have, the kind of diversity that they bring to design and architecture, what they believe in, what they put together, and what they stand for. So I think that's been the thought behind having you people over here. It's not a random coincidence that you people are here together, seated against each other. So thank you very much. Sorry, seated with each other, not against. I'm going to go behind this a little bit, where we had this very thought about the domain of creativity last year, and we wanted to understand whether the design was only the prerogative of the elite, the architects and the designers in one hall, or could we actually go beyond and see design in life and in people and in the way we breathe, in the way we perceive life. And somewhere there was consensus about the fact that the design is very ingrained in the human beings that we are, not necessarily trained to be architects or designers. And it was introspected, it was expressed about by the names that you've possibly seen in the last year's recap, where we've established that design is something that we can't escape from because we are humans, and we see that around us. Now to go forward and say the very process of design as to what kickstarts when you get something to design, what actually impacts it, influences it, takes it forward, propels it, brings it to a point where you have found expression, and then having found expression for the design, is it what you stay true with? Is it what actually stands you in good stead all through the process and beyond? That's possibly what we are going to try and explore today. So I'm going to run a couple of slides, and then I'm going to open the house first to the panelists and to you people. Going forward, all right, so this should explain. Words everywhere, in the air we breathe, in the waves that we see crashing onto the beach, something on the other side is design, is built. And whether it's built out of the words or otherwise is something that is for all of us to think through. The words put together, I think, somewhere find a form. This is what a school of thought is. This is what it's showing, that the form could actually take place out of the words that we built in our heads, maybe written down, maybe put together on a brief, maybe put together as a concept, but yeah, words. They could very easily convert themselves into the form that you put together. Telling stories, as I already said, is I think one of the instincts that we as humans share, to tell stories and to receive them. Makes me think and bring my story to a point, my discussion to a point, where I want to know whether does design need a story? Does design need a story? Guys, that's the first question today, where I would want opinions. First, the expert opinions, not to say there are not expert opinions out there, but then the house's opinions. Does design need a story? Very quickly, we're going to do this question to all 6 of you. Dean, could you please start with that?
Yes.
Wonderful, short and crisp. Okay, Dean, I didn't mean that crisp.
Yeah, I think if you like an architecture to a movie, for example, I mean, movies are created by these storyboards that they pin up these little images and verbal connections, and eventually they put a film together. They actually go through it, and I think architecture is very much sort of assembled in the same way, where you actually evolve a sort of approach to the architecture. You create sometimes a very hypothetical story, but it actually holds your final product together.
Okay, wonderful. Bahar?
Definitely, I would say design needs a story, whether it's conscious or not, because every expression comes from a designer's own individual experience and take on nature, take on life. So I would say conscious or subconscious, definitely. Design needs a story, and it is one.
Mm-hmm. Arjun?
I think more than a story, maybe commentary that's more important through architecture. I'll probably start to define that a little bit later in the process.
Right.
Right, but it's interesting that Dean brought up the point of cinema, film, for example. We always call architecture, in a sense, as some form of art, but if you look at the other mediums, if you look at art, or you look at literature, you look at cinema, you look at music, all of those, all four of them, actually had the innate capability to mobilize different sort of energies at a...
Sorry, people may have missed that. Could you just repeat those four for the benefit
art,
of
literature, cinema, and music, right? All of these four embodied a great power for transformation, social transformation, revolution, sending out a very, very deep message. I think entire movements have been mobilized around these four art forms. Then perhaps as the discussion evolves, we need to understand if architecture has the power to mobilize the same sort of change.
Right. Trust me, this is going to get very interesting. Guys, this is going to get very, very interesting, I promise you that. Salil.
Well, if you ask my honest, quick, short opinion.
Yes, of course.
I don't think...
As honest as possible.
I don't think architecture needs a story for architecture purely, as pure architecture to evolve. And not in the nature of, in the manner in which stories are in fact being searched for and adapted today. I mean, there are buildings that have become fish, lotuses, you know, I mean, with all due apologies, Superman, is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, stupid, it's architecture. Because in my view, you know, we're not even talking about poetry anymore, forget prose, we're looking at 140 character tweets. So the whole question that's being asked to architects from people who are all non-architects is to explain our architecture, and we are almost being apologetic, and so we, you know, need to give a punchline and say, you know, what's the big idea? And you cannot explain architecture in 140 characters. So unfortunately, there's this whole sort of thing that architects need, you know, to say I'm doing a Gothic building or I'm making a fish or, and all I mean, what's sad is that most of these stories are coming from outside of architecture. They don't evolve out of architectonics. You're not talking about materiality. You're not talking about scale. Those are the stories with which architecture needs to be created. You cannot, for example, explain a game of chess by, you know, giving analogies from outside of the game. So you have to stay within. So if it's music, nobody asks you what's the story of your music. Your music is your music, and the notes make the music.
Sure.
So you don't make music because it's, you know, so I mean, I'm just saying that if you're staying with the story, the language of the story has to come out of architecture, not from somewhere else.
So some of this is going to come back to you, Salil, very quickly. Just a brief one. So, Shabnam, does design need a story?
I don't think the answer is as simple.
Exactly.
I don't think it's just a yes or a no.
Yes. No, I mean, no, yes or no. That's what I mean.
I think there are instances where, yes, you need a story.
Yeah.
I think more than the story, it's the brief. So for me, I think it's maybe to build the story on the brief, or a lot of times I think it's the site itself. It's the scale, it's what you feel around you when you enter a site, and that goes on to actually become the design, where the story is just the end product, which you end up creating after it's already built. So I think it could go either ways.
I'll bear that in mind and I'll come back to you on that soon. So Mitro, your initial thoughts on does design need a story?
Yeah, I'll pick a little bit on, I think, different comments which have come. I think somebody had mentioned about the architect, and perhaps we are not so much in control, and that's where I'm sort of envious about a film director. Right now, I'm not talking about the director in focus.
Okay.
But I think I have a slightly different opinion from Salil. Which is actually that most of the architecture actually is informed and comes from a space which is outside itself. And there is a reason for it. That just like analogies of, you know, philosophy which sort of link, whether it's a Zen philosophy which links mundane activities of life. And I mean, we have the same cycles. We get up, we brush, we do this, we do that, and it's the same cycle we live every day.
Yes.
But there is some kind of meaning which is found in that. So I see that there is a lot of meaning which is outside, and what the story does is that the story is the only portable element of an architecture. Something which surrounds the building, but that's the only thing which you can take away. And I think that's also linked to music, because the experience of music sometimes, there is a sensation and there is something which sort of gets embedded in memory, and that sort of gets tingled at another moment at another place. So I think this portability of the idea of a story and experience, I think that's a very interesting thing which surrounds architecture. And most people remember, like I did a little experiment within the office, which was to ask people which are the restaurants, you know, they like to go, and inevitably, those were the happiest moments of their life. They were not great restaurants or terrible restaurants.
Sure.
They were from good to bad
But
to
they had good memories
average.
about it, yeah.
But I think it's linked more to human experience, and that actually changes perception completely.
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. Thank you. Thanks, Sumitro. So I'm going to go back to Dean. Dean, Salil has, okay, so of the initial impressions, yes, yes, subjective, subjective, no, and yes. All right, so if that's what we've sort of put together as the answer to this question. I'm going to go back to Dean about filmmaking, architecture, film story. If you can elaborate a little bit on that. Salil had something in his speech that he was talking about film and say, okay, how do you actually relate with it? If you can take that further.
I'll give an example
Yes.
of a building we designed in Meghalaya for this Kasi lady.
Meghalaya. Yeah.
And it's a matriarchal system, so they make the decisions, and she had 4 sons, which she wanted a house which would accommodate 4 of them almost independently. So my first sketch was like a storyboard sketch you see in films, of this lady shooting this bunch of arrows across from one hill to the other, which she was going to build on. It was an amorphous site, you know, very sort of odd-shaped thing.
Right.
And these 4 arrows split in the sky and eventually land on the site. And the roofs eventually turned out to be these almost arrowhead, because the site had views in all directions. And it's a very sort of informal, you know, almost fun sort of exercise in creating the storyboard for that. But it actually did shape the house, you know, it defined the way the roofs and I think that very sort of light approach to storytelling could possibly lead to, you know, a starting direction in an exercise like this. Yeah.
Right. Arjun, you have to elaborate on that filmmaking process or the story that cinema is vis-a-vis. I have heard 4 of you possibly talk about that in your initial thought, and I'm sure there are many out there in the room who also have some simile between the two processes of having a film convey a story and likewise architecture doing the same. If I can have you elaborate on that a bit before. I know Bahar is also wanting to say something on that.
I'm actually going to shift away from that because I know Soumitra is going to hit the filmmaking thing quite hard. The thing is, I know where Salil is coming from. I completely understand.
Of course.
And it's not a no. I don't think his answer was a no.
No.
I think his answer was a reaction to a situation where we essentially inhabit a world without any nuance.
So the question is, does design need a story? And he's very categorically said, no, I don't think we need a story.
Okay. So
Sorry.
I'm going to
No.
I'm going to speak for you, my friend.
Please, Salil. Please, Salil. Yeah, sure.
As I said, we inhabit a world without nuance, okay? And we're always caught in this sort of purgatory between communicating something, in which case things often get too literal, or do we work through the language of metaphors, philosophy, and analog, in which case things get lost.
Yeah.
And in a world which communicates through 140 characters, right? I believe his reaction was that rather than story, a lot of architecture tends to push into the world of thematics, gimmickry, aesthetic appropriations in order to make it very easily consumable for someone who doesn't have more than 30 seconds to try and grasp an idea. And I think that's where the danger comes in Because then these aren't really stories.
So let me find you a synonym for story, narrative. Does that make you feel better? Salil, Arjun?
It's the same principle. Salil, please.
Salil?
No, I mean, I thank you, Arjun, so I need support here. But
no, not really.
But
Not really.
my concern is, and it's a concern because, one goes to lots of, say, and there are architectural schools mushrooming out. They're growing out of, everywhere.
Everywhere.
Any jury you go for, and, they have been trained to say, what's your concept? And you get these bizarre concepts. You go for client presentations where he shortlisted architects, and they want to, in 30 seconds, know what's the concept. And if you don't, and you start sort of talking about, you're basically trying to work with the context. You're trying to understand this lady and her family and the structure. We just heard two gentlemen from the business talking about 2 crore houses. They don't have time. So they want an architect to give this one-line big idea saying, I'm making a mushroom. And this building is a cucumber, So that's what gets them, they understand it. You're trying to talk about light, materials, they don't have time for this.
Right.
That's what the young kids are getting pushed into, doing this because they've been told, what's your concept? If you don't, so lots of times when I've actually gone to juries and you really want to fail the professor, not the students, because he's been pushing kids to say, what's the concept?
So Salil, I hear you, so do everyone. But I want to go a little deeper than that. Do you actually believe that when we sit down to design, we have nothing to guide us in our heads? This is not about what we share. I'm going to come to that aspect as well. I'm going to come to a section which I think is going to be the fire. That's going to be the hot one. But it's not about selling the idea to a jury, tomorrow to a client, or later on to an audience. I am talking about a design which you're going to embark upon, and you have a certain idea, a certain narrative, a certain story, a certain germ in your head, which all of us, I believe, do have before we start with that. This section is actually about that. I must clarify. This section is about that one initial thought that kick-started the story, that kick-started the very concept of design, which I think if anybody says, okay, we don't have that and we just start sketching something, telling something through our designs, is that true, Bahar, do you think?
I think when we are given a brief, by a client, you have a blank mind because you are just listening first and taking in the input. You're listening to the clients. You are reacting to the context. You are reacting to site. You're reacting to situations. I also feel you are reacting to how the project can be done in a very subconscious way, because there are some, once you've practiced long enough, you immediately start thinking of the execution also, where materials come into mind, which also can become a source of inspiration. So the initial reaction is definitely where the whole narrative starts. Once the brief is in front of you. So where does, the design story originate? It's really different for different projects, and it's really difficult to say which one is which.
I understand. That's the whole idea to explore. Soumitra, you have to further your thought on cinema architecture. You heard Salil now. You know where he's coming from. So while you and I may initially think that, okay, he is straight away trashing the idea of having any story, anything to do with design, do you have any thoughts on that?
No, I can totally understand where
he's coming
Salil is coming from, which is from a state of lot of disappointment with the situation. And I'm not alien to that either.
Sure.
But I think the kind of association which was, I think Dean talked about, Arjun talked about the idea of the film, and I think the story is actually, now these are very subjective comments. I mean,
exactly.
I'm taking it as my take on this.
But that's the idea.
That the story is actually, is an individual's way of dealing with something. I mean, years ago when I think Rajay was teaching us in the studio, and for once he said that the requirements which the client gives you is not a brief. An architectural brief is what you make of it. So at that time, we couldn't figure out head or tail of what he's talking about. We thought, you know, the client is giving a straightforward list of things to deal with, and you do it. But I think what Saril points out to a very important thing is the expertise in operating through architectural methods and means. And that expertise is getting missing, that the hands, again, I quote Rajay, we were doing a studio, and so I had done something absurd. And of course, from our school, people are well known to talk a lot. So he said, one day, you guys, your heads will grow so big and your hands will fall off.
Yeah.
Because they would have never worked. You would have only talked. So I think that's where, and that is a kind of concern which we always feel, that is it coming too much from outside, which is being abused rather than used.
So I have two thoughts here, Sumitro. I hear you. I have two thoughts here. One is you saying that, or maybe not conforming, but having heard this, that the client's brief or client's requirements is not the brief, it's the architecture per se, which has the brief. Dean, do you agree with that? Who pays you, man?
I think we're interpreters of a client's brief, really. It doesn't, as you said, it's not necessarily the final brief. And it's a big challenge for us to actually sort of take on board what the client says and filter it, create our own interpretation of it, convince the client, arm twist at times, and come up with something which is we're both happy with in a way.
So I wanted to understand the difference between the client's brief. Is it not possible as architects for us to actually segregate the two? To segregate the client's requirements, which is important, and have architecture form its own brief in our heads. Arjun, do you think you're able to segregate this exercise?
Almost always, I suppose that has to be the case, because clients' briefs are fundamentally one-dimensional and boring.
Function-based.
I think our role as enablers and as catalysts, as arbitrators, sociologists, anthropologists, psychologists, right, is you need to start reading below the surface, not just of the client's brief, that's one aspect of it.
Right.
But it's for a whole bunch of other data as well. Right, so in a sense, I think what Soumitra said is perfectly right, is ultimately you write your own program. And it also sometimes has to be divergent narratives, because there are different ways of communicating different ideas to make them more palatable to different groups of people. And I think that's unfortunately a space we are forced to occupy. You can't commit to absolute honesty right around the board. It's sometimes using certain means to achieve the right ends. And the other thing I think is our profession today, I think we're operating from a position of deep insecurity and being defensive. I feel a lot of what we've seen of historical architecture, even through the modernist period, or I think a lot of those guys, if they were either communicating or producing the architecture which they produced back then, if they tried doing it today, they would be flayed alive. Because today, I mean, there is so much widespread criticism. You have the internet, you have social media. Half the time, instead of thinking critically and creatively, you're thinking defensively, that how am I going to present this? How am I going to communicate this idea? Is it really, sometimes that freedom, which I think is a fundamental, what you call freedom or intuition or the ability to interpret, is something that we give up way too often to try and be politically correct. And we need to try and find a way to kind of arbitrate that a bit better, because we're going to land up with these kind of homogenized, politically correct solutions and lose out on what can really be the joy of architecture and design.
Sure. Salil, do you agree that maybe we do operate out of out of a certain insecurity, a preconceived insecurity that is ingrained as architects because you got to sell. Do you agree?
Yeah,
with
I mean,
that?
I do agree that, you know, with what with the scale of work that's coming up and the number of architects that are available, and you know that you have access to people from, that more and more architects are being asked to explain themselves.
Exactly.
And architects feel that they therefore need to justify what they're doing.
Yeah.
And then, you know, either you're not articulate enough or you cannot explain well enough, so you're trying to find the easy way out and explain to somebody who can't understand what you're saying. So there is a sort of, so I think one has to therefore sort of build oneself, you know, I think as architects. And unfortunately, architects are not being trained to do that. You know, of being able to be more, get more articulate.
Sure.
Because when we talk about this whole, you know, this client's brief, or so to sense a set of requirements are always very simple.
Yeah.
If you're looking at a home, it's, you know, 3 bedrooms, 2 car parks, 1 kitchen.
Right.
It's the same across the board. So what is it that you make out of this? You know, do you therefore say that, oh, because you know, for example, you know, so
Sure.
what, taking that and converting it into architecture is what you're supposed to be doing.
Right. So in our next section, we are going to come to that. Shabnam, I want to go to you. Sorry, let's just come back to you. Shabnam, everybody's been talking about architecture and architects. Please bring interior design to this stage. How does it work in terms of the brief, the story that's there to be sold to the clients, or to be able to sell? If you can let me know.
I think I completely echo the same thoughts that Sumitro and Arjun and Salil have just said. I think it's the same theory that applies fundamentally, even when it comes to design, because you do get your set brief, but finally it's you who is instrumental. And whether it's you acting as a psychiatrist with the client and trying to dissect what's going on inside their head, or whether it's actually aligning what individual members of the family are feeling and then trying to do that, or whether it's a hospitality project, you're actually looking at the end target audience. It's the same thing. The process is absolutely identical. You're just the mediator who's taking that brief but then interpreting it in your language.
Sure. Any one of the 6 of you have anything else to add to the basic question, or does design need a story or a narrative or a certain basic concept before we move to the crowd? Do we have anyone else putting in anything here? I need to ask you guys.
I think when dealing with a client, it's an extremely passionate exercise where the client really gets, especially in houses, they really get involved, you know, both husband, wife. I've been the cause of about 6 divorces because of that.
Yep. All right, Bahar.
No, just a comment on that, because over the years we just built so many homes that sometimes I feel that building a home is a very stressful activity even for the client. So not just the architect too. So we have to just make the process even better and to tell them that this is going to enhance their living at the end of the whole process.
Sure. Yes, Arjun, of course.
This is going to come across as extremely arrogant and pompous, right? But the one thing I've noticed...
Bring it on.
Yeah. The one thing I've noticed, even with a lot of my friends who are well-educated, well-read, okay, most of them will have more than, well, an above-average understanding of art, because art is easily accessible online as well as physically, right? They have a good understanding of a wide range of music, from, you know, classical to contemporary to electronic. So you can, same with literature, same with poetry, same with cinema.
Cinema as well.
So the average well-traveled, well-educated person,
well-read, well-bred,
is going to have a certain amount of esoteric knowledge about the subject which they can actually talk about constructively.
Sure.
Now the scary thing is, even though you're inhabiting the built environment every minute of your life, it is astonishing the number of well-educated, well-traveled people who don't understand bugger all about it. They simply cannot conduct a conversation with you about design, apart from product design and a few more kind of, you know, gimmicky references. They cannot have a constructive discussion with you on the built environment. It is an extremely sad situation that the most important and the most pervasive part of the world of design and art is something that people simply cannot relate to.
Interesting, interesting. Anyone else? That's an interesting thought to come. from you, Arjun. Anyone else? Savitru, you want to?
I think just two lines because
Yes,
I
of
think
course.
we should
Yeah,
move,
we will do that. No problem.
I think the story is actually like a silent song, which is separate, which is for your own kind of. It's a parallel narrative. So of course the client's needs are definitely have to be taken care of.
Sure.
That's not negotiable.
Yeah, exactly.
It's how to bring a song. See, all songs have the same letters, and what the client is telling you is that these are the 7 notes which should be there in the house.
It should be there in the
but
harmony, yeah.
he doesn't know how to make it into a song
Of
at
course,
all.
of course.
So I think that's. I think there is also it's also a personal passage to be actually attempting to do that, and I think that's the most enjoyable part
Sure.
of practice,
Sure.
where you start getting into that, and that actually informs the other part where you actually build.
So by now it's been established that we are akin to filmmakers and to music composers. We can very well deliver the goods. I'm going to throw this question to the house. Anyone out there in the audience, would you please give me the answer? Does design need a story, a narrative? Anyone? We need some mics in the hall, please. Team FOAID. Yes, of course. So we have the first hand going up there. Can we please get him the mic? Sorry. All right. So I'll just come back to you, Prashant. Very briefly, you need to be very concise about what you're thinking.
My answer to this question is no, design doesn't need a story. In fact, design creates a story.
Wow. Okay. Fantastic. Lovely. I think that needs a quick applause. Prashant.
Yeah, that's exactly I was
Sorry.
telling.
Sorry. Can you?
That's exactly I was telling. Design should unfold a story.
Sorry, we didn't get that at all. I'm sorry, I didn't get that.
The design itself should unfold a story.
The design itself will unfold a story. That's your take on it. Wonderful. Fantastic. Mr. Prashant Sutaria? Okay.
I have a big yes for it.
Yes.
It needs a story, but it should be a love story. You should love what you execute, or people admire it.
Interesting. So with love you mean passion. You need to have passion for the story that you're building, right? Fantastic.
I would say design tells the story of its time. So design reflects the story when the time in which it's designed, looking at the circumstances. So if you look at the work of Charles Correa or B.V. Doshi, it reflected the Gandhian philosophy. If you look at the time, today's time, then we see the work which is of opulence. So it tells the story of today's time. So rather than a story, it tells the story of its own time.
So my question is slightly different. My question is, when you sit down to design, when you initiate the process of design, do we have a narrative? Guys, we need a couple of mics, please, if you can reach across to the audience. Thank you. Yes, please.
Yes, I think a design and story are two things that happen simultaneously.
Sorry, who's speaking? I'm all right, sorry, thanks. Yep.
Okay, I think a design and story are two things that happen simultaneously. I mean, a starting point could be a story that is built subconsciously in your own head.
My question still is, will design start with a story? Does design depend on the story? Let me be very, very pointed here. Does design depend on the story to start? If you can.
Yes.
Okay, yes.
My answer is yes, but I just want to add to it that, and in confines of sensitive architecture, the architect has to be a good storyteller, and if the client is a part of it,
so good
then
is
you
subjective.
get a good.
Good is subjective. What's good for him is not good for me. Arjun knows that.
So that's why I said in confines of sensitive design.
Puran, I want to
Sure, of course.
say something.
Yes, of course.
If you go to unfortunately he's not he's no more, but if you go to a Bhimsen Joshi concert, do you start asking Bhimsen Joshi what is going to be the story or what you're going to sing?
Mm-hmm. So
why do you need to have architects to explain themselves? I'm not understanding this.
I'll tell you.
Why should an architect say, if you're going to enter this building of mine, this is the story behind it?
When you ask Bhimsen Joshi, "Sahab, aap kya ga rahe ho?" he will say,
I'm going to sing these 7 notes.
Hang on. No.
That's what I'm going to do.
No. So he is going to be singing the morning raga in the first prayer of the day.
Which is actually just those particular notes.
He will not give you a Sandhya rag in the morning. He'll say, okay, Salil, You're here at 4 a.m. in the morning.
But
Please listen to the morning
what
raga.
is the choice he's making?
Yeah.
His choice he's making is that he's ultimately picking up X number of notes out of the palette he has.
Agreed.
But you don't go and, he just, that's what he says. You don't say, but what's the story of your, of that piece?
Sure. So we are actually talking about design, let's say. Just stick to design and say, okay, does design need
even when you take the analogy of movies,
yes,
it's like, you know, it's the same story, boy meets girl, it's like, you know, whether it's Star Wars 1 or 3 or 4 or whatever they called it, you know, there's a monkey who came and saved everybody, and, you know, the princess was stolen. It's the same story here.
But
these Ramayana or Star Wars 4 or perhaps even being done today.
But these days
the
you have...
question is of how it's told, and that comes out of cinema.
Sure.
It doesn't come out of saying that it's coming out from somewhere else. He uses the tools of cinema to tell you his story in film.
But a parallel, sorry to say, Salil, also is that there are stories which are told differently.
There's a story for him to tell because that's the
essence.
The essence of cinema. But if it's Bhimsen Joshi, what is the story?
Puran, sorry.
Why do we need a story?
Yes.
I think what might have been more interesting is if this came later and you started to get closer to the interpretations of what a story is. Because I agree that I think in a country obsessed with Bollywood culture, you need to deconstruct what a story is before you start asking whether something needs a story or not.
So you say that because you do not know what's coming next. I'm going to quickly go back to the audience and say, yes, sir. Somebody needs a mic here, please. Okay, somebody has a mic here. We'll get it to you. Yes.
My point of view is like I completely agree with what Salil is saying.
Yes.
Like stories are mostly for selling the ideas.
Right.
And what architecture is more of like technology and climatology coming together.
I needed to hear that. Yes. Somebody needs to give a mic to the gentleman here, please. Can you have a mic here, this side as well?
Yeah, I am here, sir. Just hold on. Yes.
Yes, please.
I think without story, you cannot make the film. The same way, if you do not have a story, how will you design it? Because the design is not something like everywhere it is, ultimately it is a universal or common. Everywhere, with the story, the design changes.
Fantastic. You've conveyed your point. Thank you.
Hi. You just showed the visual of Louis Kahn, one slide, and where Louis Kahn asked Brick what you would like to be. And the Brick says, yes, I would like to be an arch. So actually, Louis Kahn was trying to establish his dialogue with the Brick.
Sure.
And all these dialogues put together makes a big story of his IIM complex or Dhaka complex or something like that. That is one thing, whether you call it a story or not, but it's based on the dialogue with the Brick.
Sure.
Second thing about Salil said that about the ragas, what Bhimsen Joshi, I would like to give one small story that these ragas are very ancient old and no one can invent the ragas. But there was one maestro called Kumar Gandharva who invented ragas, and those ragas were based on the story. To be very frank, the very famous ragas everybody should listen to is called Mat Surja. Mat Surja is like the goats going to the temple for the Bali. And when they make a particular noise, when he is to the temple near the Devas where Kumar Gandharva used to stay, and the goats going, the sound of the goats going to the story, he narrated those sound in his own story and created the raga called Mat Surya. So these are the two examples which I would
even
like
if
to
I
give.
did not know this story, I agree with you that even the ragas are based on stories.
Yeah, story.
All
so
right. And
most of the architecture, you are calling it the story, but those are basically converted into a concept.
Sure, exactly. So we are, as I'm saying, story, narrative,
and
certain
without
concept.
the concept, no, there won't be any design.
Sure.
The design will be a big failure
if you did not have
a
anything
story
to back
or a
it.
concept or something. It will be a big failure.
Respect your thought. Anyone else?
Yes, I would like to
yes,
speak.
Please.
Yes, I would like to say that
I'll make a request. If whoever has the mic in the hand, please stand up and speak because
Yes.
nobody can see where you are. Sorry.
I would like to put up that a story is basically a journey. As I could see from Arjun and others' perspective, that on the discussion pointer, that platform, it is a discussion, it is an idea, which would lead to a story. But like I would go from here as a journalist and write the whole story as a design. Till here, it's discussion, its presence, whether it will be an expression of a journey for the success of the project, what the client is thinking, what the peculiarities would be in the technical terms, whether it would come out as a portrait, as a film for the client, for the creative satisfaction of the designer. So they both are dependent, but just on the beginning, we can't say it's a story, it needs a story. it goes through the journey of discussion, strategizing, and then a lot of, under operation things, the journey. We don't need a script writing kind of pen or songs all the time. Like he said, very limited edition, we say only Bollywood knows how to depict stories.
Sure.
Designers say too, without a pen.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Dean, I hope you're coming back. All right. Okay. So, yeah, anyone, please pass the mic on to the people who are raising their hands. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah.
I'm Sanyogita. I do definitely feel that design needs a story. Like Taj Mahal had a very romantic story behind it. We have a story, like if you have some design would need a local context embedded in its story. So you have to have some kind of romance, excitement when you design.
I love the
and
passion.
that's where the story comes.
I love the passion with which you say this. All right, a round of applause for that. Okay, guys, anyone else?
Yeah,
Please, I need the mics there.
I've got a mic here. The answer to this, I'm just comparing it with music, is a yes and a no. According to me, from what I heard, I've just been interpreting or comparing it to music. There are two kinds of music. One, which is music composed as music, and the other one when music is written over lyrics. And
Yes.
we really know that all the best musicals are not the music first and the words put after. It's the words and the music put over that.
That's
so
so well
sometimes
analyzed.
you need a story to write music.
Super.
And it's a purer form of music, which I would say a purer form of design would be when there is no story there.
So if I may ask you, aren't the words that clients brief and then we write the story on that with our notes? Is that how
So
you
that's
see
that's
that?
one where you take that story and build
Sure.
it, but other times
Sure.
you can create a space
Sure.
without that story.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yes, please. Anyone has the mic here?
Yeah, I do.
Hi. Sorry, I can't see you. Yes, of course. Sorry,
Okay.
yes, can somebody get the mic to the lady here also? Of course, yes.
Okay, what I'm thinking of is that every design tells a story. Now, if you're, I'll give you an example. Like somebody cited the Taj Mahal. It's a monument to love. It was designed as a functional monument to love, and then the aesthetics told the story about it. You can see the Red Fort and other beautiful forts that are not only doing the function of a fort, but they're also aesthetic.
Yes, of course.
And similarly with office buildings, you can see some really beautiful forts, some really beautiful office buildings, and you can see some really ugly forts and ugly office buildings. And the thing is that the function states the story, and then the aesthetics go ahead and either pretty it up or go ahead and suck the souls out of people who go there, whether it's in the office, whether it's a tourist attraction. Some of them, you take a look at it and you ask yourself, good God, what are they thinking?
Right.
Okay, thank
Of
you.
course, thanks. Yes, please. Thank you, Dean, for being back here. Yes.
I personally feel that every architect is a storyteller. Now, it all depends on how you write the story. As Mr. Salil Landiva was saying, we will essentially not say that my building looks like a mushroom or like a cucumber, which is people do, but not essentially the way things should be done. But of course, the whole route for the storytelling has to be based on the context of the place where you belong to, where the architecture is supposed to be put in, the context of the space, the people who are going to be staying there, and everything, the climate, etc. So
Sure.
it is a story, but how you write a story is finally very important.
Sure. Thank you. Yes, please. Sorry, the mic hasn't reached the lady here. Can you please? Yes, of course.
Yes, hi. From the interior design perspective,
Yes.
I would look at the story in the term of mood board that we create for the client, because when they come and they give you objectives of what they want, and it completely differs from the reality. Like if they say they want a tropical house, and what it actually means is completely different. So to actually put visuals together and to create a story or a mood board where they really understand what they are signing up for, and we stick to that brief till the end, so it becomes much easier for the client and for the designer to be honest to what you're working on and the final product, because there's so much available. Every night they go to a new restaurant and they say, I saw something there that was very tropical and I want that, and you're like,
Sure.
That's not really tropical.
So that's interesting. That's interesting. I'm sure
So
Shabnam
it
will
gives
agree
you
with that.
a path to follow.
Of course. Shabnam, you have to say something to that. Do you agree with what she's putting together? She's coloring your story.
I think the whole gamut of conversation is very interesting, where somebody said that the design actually creates the story to
Yes.
other opinions. So I don't think there's an answer as simple as a yes or a no, which has been
Fair.
echoed by some of the people.
I was actually on the point that she made about your palette, your mood board becoming the story in design.
Yeah, but
You
the
agree
mood
with-
board itself is a story for me.
So I wanted her to go back to that and say, okay, I had a story, so I put that together.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, it's all contextual. You know,
Exactly.
you can't alienate the mood
Exactly.
board to what the final product is.
Exactly.
And,
Arjun, you picked up the mic for something.
Sorry, again, I'm going to be a little provocative here.
Of course, please be.
Both to the mood board question as well as the guy with the office buildings and forts, right?
The guy with the?
With the office buildings and the forts, who said there are
Yes, of course.
beautiful and ugly forts and
Yes.
beautiful and ugly office
Yes,
buildings.
yes. So
okay,
let's have it.
first for the mood boards. Personally, and this is quite a strong opinion, there are various wide-ranging definitions of stories, right? I don't think a mood board is ever going to fit into the definition of a story. At best, it's a theme, right? So
It's a kickstart.
yeah, maybe. And as far as the office buildings and forts go, I know you were just simply giving an example. I'm not going to take it literally, but could I ask you which ugly fort have you seen? Just out of curiosity, if you have seen one, because it's very relevant to the questions of forts and office buildings, because we know there are lots of ugly office buildings. I'd like to know if you've actually seen an ugly fort, because I don't think too many forts were designed on a whim. They had
stories.
They were of a different time, they were of a place, they were of a material, they were of protection, they were of many things. And generally when architecture builds of those principles,
it has a meaning.
Chances are it's not going to come across as ugly. So have you seen any ugly forts?
So ugly is subjective. Let me just help the young man over here, Arjun. So ugly is subjective, and I think we leave it at that. Guys, anybody else in the audience? Anyone else in there? Yes, please. You've been waiting. Sorry, and thank you.
Yeah, story need. Yes, a story need. When we start designing, we think little story in our mind. Story or design reflect architect psychology and client personality.
So you agree that you
Yeah,
need something to begin, and
yeah,
that's a little
need
narrative, a
something
concept, an idea that you
Yeah.
begin with. Anyone else before we move on? Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Sir, can I put up a question here?
You have to actually answer this question.
See, it's in the same way.
If it's a question against the question that comes after you give me the answer.
Actually, I haven't come up with an answer because I have this question in my mind.
So think the next section will come back to you. Once you have the answer, you are ready to ask the questions again. Because
Actually, it's a collection.
I
Hello,
can't
here.
see. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm here in the corner. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Actually, it's a collection of several stories. It starts with design, but when you complete a building, it's actually a collection of many stories,
Lovely.
not one. It's
Lovely.
a collection.
Super. Fantastic thought. Anyone else before we move on to the next section? Yes, of course, there's a hand up here. Can you guys please be a little quick in reaching the mics? Yes. And so you have it. Yes. Please.
Hello. This is I am myself Rahul. Here we are with a few words: story, design, and music and architecture. It is said that architecture is a frozen music. Story start with word, and music starts with sargam, sare gama. So I think yes, architecture and design needs story, and many times clients itself brings a story to us, and we start design. And for the design, we need something over there to start with, a point or a scribbling. So I think yes, design needs story, and a story becomes with many meetings with client, consultants, and the sittings.
Of course. Yes. The last question here. Somebody needs the mic.
Hello.
I'm just going to take one or two more questions. Yes, please.
The process of client coming to the
Someone get a
architect.
mic there, please. Yeah.
The process of client coming to the architect.
Yes.
Itself, he doesn't know what is in his mind. So that's where the story starts. And the execution of the project, where the story ends, is the name of that. The story gets the name as a design.
Of course. Of
So
course.
design and story, both are the same words.
So that's that. We are going to go further with that thought. Thank you for sharing that. We are going to go further with that thought. Anyone else? I thought we needed a mic there. The lady was looking for a mic. Can someone please hand over the? You have.
Yeah,
Yes,
hi.
of course.
I feel a design needs an expression rather than a story. Because until unless you can express your design, the story has no meaning.
Can I come to that section in a while, and we'll ask you back again. So expression follows the initial thought. So we are on the initial thought, the germ. We are on the germ just now. Expression actually is a culmination. Yep, the last one, and then we move on. Yes, ma'am.
I feel every architect needs a story and he has a story. So the language of telling a story is different by every architect.
So Salil is in denial, is it? Do you think Salil is in denial?
But every architect, somebody will have a language of maybe climatology, somebody will have a language of metaphors, or somebody will have a language of different materials. So I think everybody is doing a great job by telling his story in a different language.
That's well put together. Thank you very much. Okay, all right. So we're going to move on to the next section. Thank you for your thoughts in here, and we'll come back to you people.
One small thing.
Yes, of course, sir.
You've not defined who's the one who originates the story. Because lots of times you have clients who come and say, this is my story,
Yeah,
now
so-
you make a building.
So I'll clarify that. I'm
she
on
said,
the architect.
Yeah, like she said, I want a tropical building.
Sure.
Or he wants a Greek building in...
No.
you
So
know.
I'm glad you asked
What do you do
this.
with that?
I
Yeah, whose
wish somebody
story then are
asked.
you- yeah.
I wish somebody asked this. What if the client story gets interwoven? So no, my objective of bringing this thought together on this panel is because this forum is about architects and designers. It's about our story. What's our role play in the narrative that drives us design? That's what we're talking about. Okay. So I think it's not about the clients really. Okay. I am also being signaled about the time. We need to move forward. We're going to take some time, Kavya, on this. Going forward, we are on to how the design comes together, the simple ingredients that make design taste good. So we know what goes into design. We all have our own formula, our own recipes. Sometimes it's the brief. Yeah, so while you may enjoy that as a process, and sometimes it's the context. I've heard that in the first section that the context drives the design. And then the concept comes together. And you're wondering as to what you want to do. At this point, you are grappling. You're reaching out. You're really the octopus who's got his tentacles actually taking him everywhere. And you are finding the answers. So yes, I have no idea what's going on, is where we are. We've all faced this. We've all come to a point where we don't know what's going on. And we're too afraid to ask. We're too afraid to communicate. So it can actually be as simple as bread pudding, putting things together and having it served, or we can go round and round. We really do not know where we are landing. So my next question, and I've gone through this section very quickly because I know we're going a little slow. What makes the design? It really is a thought that I want to have the panelists come together about as to what makes their design. What actually constitutes the design. It may not have been the story, it may have been the story, but what actually does the design process mean to you? Bahar, I'm going to start with you. Very, very briefly, if you can.
For me, the design process is actually like a spiritual journey.
Wow.
You know,
Okay.
You cannot define it specifically in terms of words. Because there is definitely an emotional content to it also. It's also a very visceral reaction. So I would say that is the germ of the design process, is that visceral reaction that you have as a designer to a potential project.
Sure.
So yes, so for design for me, definitely is a very spiritual experience.
Fantastic. Dean?
I think it's the connect that you have with a client, the real emotional connect, that confidence and trust the client eventually puts in you.
Lovely.
That leads to, and I think it can come from really sort of very informal interactions. I remember one of our early clients, I met the person, I sketched out a design. He said, okay, it looks nice, but I don't really know if it'll work on site. So I said, don't worry, tomorrow morning I'll be there, just get a bag of lime and I'll mark it out. And the next morning I went there, all energetic to mark it out, and there he was standing on site with a bag of limbus. I said lime, and he got limbus here.
Super.
So it was just
That's passion.
He of course had a cheeky smile saying, how are you going to mark it with limbus, And it's just that informal breaking of the ice with the client that led to a nice, a great project.
Lovely. Fantastic. Salil? What makes design? You've spoken a bit about it, but I want to, on this section, just focus on the fact that these are your ingredients for design.
I can't say this in 140 characters. I think I think it's just the experience of, of that journey. And it's sometimes very personal. And I agree with the spiritual aspect of it. I mean, lots of times for me, it's like you're almost seeking it to, transcend into poetry, for example, and just, the fewest words that you can express it in the most beautiful way.
Sure.
And so, and therefore that process, of course, varies from, across every project, right? It's not, there's no formula for it.
Of course.
You don't know when it's going to hit you, what's going to trigger it off. So, I think it's the beauty of the whole journey that, for me, it just...
You're being very, very clear. Shabnam? No, the ambiguity is the clarity here. Yes.
I think it's a lot to do with the trust the client has in you.
Sure. So you're
Yes.
echoing what Dean
and
is saying.
also, you get certain clients where you know that you can push the envelope and you're not going to be questioned, and there's
Sure.
complete faith. So that's, I think, when some of your best works actually come out.
Soumitra?
I think we've all had experiences like what Dean talked about, and of which I think, and which is also quite evident from the comments which which were made about the previous topic, which was quite varied. It varied from the pragmatic to, and also the way the word story was actually understood by everyone. And for someone, or for a large section, that a story is always a love story, or that's the closest word that gets attached to it, or a story is something which is not real. So I think there are a lot of interpretations, or it's a very pragmatic understanding. So there is a wide difference. And I think that was about that. I think what we do with the clients is inevitably we need a story for ourselves to keep going. Now this is again, some people really need it, or some people thrive on the precision and the pragmatic approach which certain clients would bring. Like I had a client who said, I want a house of darkness. That was her first sentence.
Sure.
So that's a different take. Now that's a different animal from another one, which is, might say, 2 bedrooms, so many square feet. It's a different story. But then to keep our juices flowing, I think we find our own paths to figure out and sustain that, that journey is to be fun.
Okay. Arjun, sorry, I'm going to be a little quick. We need to be concise about what
Okay,
we're saying.
so
I've been just told that we are running behind.
as quickly as possible. Obviously, the spiritual aspect of it is very, very important. But I think if one is to simply meander off into thought space, it needs certain protocols and regulators. Where do those come from? I think really for me, it's an understanding of tradition as a series of innovations becomes very, very important, whether it's understanding how settlements, traditional settlements responded to their to climate, to location, to context, to material, to their culture, their sociology, how economic transactions took place, how they protected settlements. I think that becomes, for me, a very important series of what you would call it a sort of primitive parametricism, where you understand those. Because those were all a series of evolutions. They're not a static kind of calcified stop-in-time process. Where is the next evolutionary step? Those start to form a series of regulators, but then internally, your spiritual beliefs, your own cultural beliefs, your experiences, at what time, your time in life, all of these then start to become a more abstract filter for these responses, and it all kind of gets into a bit of a primordial soup. What comes out is sometimes completely unpredictable.
Sure. Very well put. Okay, moving on. Sorry, now we've heard the panelists just talk about what makes their design. I'm going to move on to the next section and very quickly run through that before we have the next question across. So we know that there is a certain overlap of design and story. We know that sometimes design goes into story and vice versa. Who knows? As you're starting the narratives that are being constructed, you have the basic ideas. How much of this actually translates into your final design is what we are going to try and see. This slide tells you about the uncertainty and the insights that we have, the research that's gone into it already. And slowly it starts to untangle itself, emerges the concept, gets into clarity, the focus, and then we have that single line coming out. That's design. But once you've designed, you could have perspectives. So I may say that, okay, my design achieves a symbiosis with the natural site, and comes in someone from the audience says the building's nothing special, but the trees surely are pretty. So we could have perspectives, and we all face that. We all have experienced that. So what was it? Was it the story that actually led to design, or the design that actually built the story after it was in place? What actually comes first? If you can very quickly tell me, Salil.
You're asking me when I'm saying you don't need a story in the first place. So.
I just need to know. I just need to know if whenever the story was what. So you can say I don't want to answer.
I think it's about internalizing all these different processes around you. So your equation with the client, your understanding of the context, the economics of the whole deal, the technology available to you. All of it has to then get internalized, and it gets filtered in.
So I'm on the sequence. Yeah. If you don't have a particular sequence, you can say, okay, nothing comes first, or everything comes first.
No, I can't say that the design needs to have, therefore, a story to start.
Sure.
Of course, you create a story out of it. It's your own internal.
Of course.
It's not necessarily the story you're publishing or you're exchanging with the client, or is driving what you're. You could be playing your own game.
Yeah, of course.
In sort of satisfying the need of what this client wants. Sure. It's your own internal, your own personal game.
Perfect.
That you're playing, and you're sort of so.
Sure.
Yeah. So it could make a very competent design. The client perhaps never knows or never knew what game you were playing in the background.
Sure. Yes, Dean.
If design is the chicken and story is the egg, you know the answer then.
So you know what, we did not put the chicken and egg over there, because I spoke about it the last year, and I was told by my team that we can't do the chicken and egg again. So this actually calls for chicken and egg there. Arjun?
It's too amorphous. Yeah, I think you're forcing us to be reductive. Sorry.
Bahar.
Yeah.
I think it's story and design is interchangeable. Because if we are looking for a starting point for something, it's the context, or like you say, it's relative is who's observing. That is that the story or is that the design?
Wow.
So yes, I think for the designer, it may be a story that he or she is telling, and maybe for the client, that's the design that is starting the story.
Lovely, that's a perspective. Soumitra?
So I think I could quite relate to one gentleman's comment here about short stories,
Yes, so many stories.
And I see it as that the designer's journey is actually a novel, which is sort of where all these projects are sort of coming in, and they actually form very different short stories.
So sequence, do you have a sequence in mind? Do you think the story comes first?
The basic thing is the major narrative of the architect or the designer's search itself. So that sort of is the primary thing, which will actually give shape to anything that comes their way. I mean, one of the most well-known architects now was actually a script writer.
Exactly.
Koolhaas, and that is a different kind of story. That's political, that's economic, that's all kinds of complex understanding.
Sure.
So I think that major story which the architect is playing in their own life and understanding, it's like the old doctor who would sense and tell you what's wrong.
Yeah.
So that means you are an expert who is going to process everything to deal with.
Sure. Shabnam?
I don't think
what
it's
comes
a
first
sequence. To be very, very to the point, I don't think it's the sequence or there is a sequence. I think it's a process. And I think everyone has their own.
All right, I respect. Dean, you have something to add?
Yeah, I think in Bombay you've got multi-stories. No?
Okay, moving on. I'll just skip through this slide. Of course, we start somewhere, we end somewhere else. After construction, we wear different hats when we're designing, or we're building, or we're sharing. I don't know how many of you agree about that. This is a school of thought. We do wear different hats at different stages. Take a second to just take this in, and then we move forward. Post-realization, sorry, that's a tongue twister. Post-rationalization. A mental projection by which we create an artificial purpose or precondition of an action. I don't know how many of you know about post-rationalization out there in the hall. How many of us have experienced it during our practice, and how many of us practice it during our design? Post-rationalizing one project, this is a view, post-rationalizing one project is actually pre-rationalizing the next one. I don't know how many of us actually see this as our process. We're getting a little intense here. And Shraddha and company will have to give us 5 minutes to mull over this, to chew this upon. My next question to the panel, and you guys will have to be quick. Post-rationalization, is it a reality? If we know what post-rationalization is it a reality? Dean, you're dying to go.
Yeah,
Yes.
My heart almost skipped a beat. I skipped because I read nationalization.
Yeah, okay, all right. Okay, yes, please.
Yeah. Like when I finished architecture in my final year, I went and visited all my designs, all the college designs, and redesigned them with my newfound knowledge. And it was an extremely rewarding exercise because you actually, with your the present knowledge, you go back to that watchman's cabin or that little bungalow, and you come with completely fresh ideas on how to approach a design. So it's extremely important to actually relook at your work with an open eye and see what was good about it, what was not so good about it. And
Sure.
It really builds up your future design.
Bahar, you have something to say about post-rationalization? Do you find that's a reality?
I think it's in all of us, in whatever we do.
Lovely.
Whether we design, we make something, even if we buy something, our mind is tuned to trying to rationalize, to maybe sometimes criticize, or sometimes to find validation in the process or in the final outcome. So I think it's a reality for any process, and most definitively for design.
Design.
Yes, and also our take on our own designs change with time. So once you revisit something, I totally agree with Dean that once you revisit something many years later, you're kind of revisiting your own self at that point of time.
Sure.
So yes.
Lovely. Arjun, you have a take on this?
Yeah, I do. Sorry, can I take about 15, 20 seconds for this? Okay. There's a very interesting article by Sanford Kwinter talking about Rem Koolhaas back in the day, and since he brought up Rem, I thought I'd bring this up, where he basically equated the actions of Rem and the way he practiced to a World War II fighter pilot, Chuck Yeager, when dogfighting skills were at their kind of zenith. And he said that flying the same plane, this guy was a legendary fighter pilot simply because he could push the envelope a bit further. He had a slightly better understanding of time, space, wind speed, his own aircraft, and he could push it just that 2 or 3% further, and therefore he excelled. I think our role as architects, in a sense, seems to be similar, that we are constantly processing immense amount of data, sensations, sensibilities at the same time. And if you're really keeping yourself open to all of these and you're working intuitively, you end up sometimes making unconscious decisions which might seem unconscious, but they're actually very carefully calibrated, which is sometimes you only see it when it's actually come to fruition. Now, if you want to call that post-rationalization, or you call it fortuitous occurrence, or you actually call it a sort of unplanned occurrence, the point is it definitely exists.
Sure, that's an interesting perspective. Salil?
Like you've said earlier, I mean, I think this internalization of what you do, and it's a constant process. It's something that you do sometimes consciously, or sometimes it's just sort of, going on in the background.
Yeah.
And of course, for being able to look back, just 5 years of what you did recently, in the past 5 years. And I mean, there are trends you see in your own work.
Yeah.
They could be completely like like an array of different kinds of projects that came in, and you sort of picked up projects the way they came in. When times are good or bad, you just, take what you get lots of times. But when you look back, you see trends in your own self, the way you react to things. There are good and bad parts of it. There are weaknesses that you see. So it does, of course, it is always something that's going to... Yeah. So I mean, it's absolutely useful to do.
Of course.
And I mean, sort of sort of
So
make
you
sure-
don't really see that in a bad light. You think
Though,
that's
therefore, I mean, however, I'd argue that there are, on the flip side, I've seen great architects post-rationalize, you put, yellow tracing on top of pictures of their own projects and then this make a concept sketch.
Yes.
That gets then published. So if you're
Wonderful.
looking at that sort of post-rationalization, that's scary.
I am glad that is out here.
Yeah,
in the
but that
open.
happens all the time.
The
I've seen
cat is
this
out of the bag.
happen. Yeah. So,
Shabnam.
I think it's the only way to evolve and grow personally.
Sure.
And I think in that sense, Bahar and Salil have put it all together.
Yeah,
So yeah,
sure.
similar thoughts.
Cool. Soumitra, post-rationalization.
Yeah, it happens.
Wow.
And
Okay.
I think I'm glad that there's extreme honesty on the stage.
Super. That's what the objective was, Soumitra. Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, going forward, just a few hours ago, we had the same panel actually opining about this discussion and their thoughts on this. Very quick clip on this, which is like 30 seconds, and then we'll wrap. Sorry guys, this is a sense of video.
Perfect Strangers, Design Meets Story. Well, my initial thoughts on the topic is that I sincerely wish design never met story. A story had never been initiated by design.
Does the story come first or does the design come first is definitely a very interesting question. For me, the process seems to sometimes oscillate organically between the two, and sometimes concept thought is so strong that it becomes the backbone of the design narrative.
So describe what architecture will do, therefore architecture before architecture is made, therefore thereby guaranteeing that it will in fact not do anything else. Have you ever wondered why this translation into this everyday language is not required of music or art or dance or even a game of chess? In my view, therefore, it is that it is not required to either initiate or translate architecture into a story, just to reduce its complexities in the name of populism. This, to my mind, is just sheer nonsense. And contrary to public opinion, there is nothing democratic about nonsense.
It's interesting that you brought up this topic of design meets story or design meets narrative, because for us, the one very, very important aspect of architecture is that we feel it's very, very much like literature or cinema or music, in being able to embody a certain element of commentary.
For me, I think when you say perfect strangers, what strikes a bell for me is that every new client that you meet is a perfect stranger, and how you need to get into their headspace and understand what that stranger is going to do to our design in that sense, and amalgamate with them and learn to create a story together.
I think the title of Design Meets Story is interesting because it shows a parallel between architecture and filmmaking, where one creates images and experiences based on the simple technique of story making. I do look forward to this event.
Wonderful. Thank you. So we need storytelling, Ang Lee said, otherwise life just goes on, like the number pi. Everything is connected, is a thought process. It's a school of thought. The universe is made of stories, not of atoms. Again, a viewpoint. I do not know how many of us agree in this hall today or otherwise. The idea of bringing this entire concept of stories and design, whether they're intertwined and what comes first, or whether do we really spend too much time telling a story rather than focusing on design, was to ensure that each one of us goes back introspecting about what's our own process, our own objective of designing and satisfying the needs for what we've been assigned to do. Thank you very much, people. Thank you so very much. I'm going to thank the panel, Salil. Thank you, Shabnam. Thank you so very much for your time, Soumitra. Arjun, thank you for being here. FOAID, we hope we are out in time. Thank you, Bahar. Thank you, Dean. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much indeed. Can we have a huge round of applause one more time for all of our panel members and for a fantastic session moderator, Mr. Puran Kumar. I'm going to request all of you to please remain on the stage. I'd like to invite firstly Mr. Farhan Akhtar from H&R Johnson to please come on stage. And please felicitate our panel members. If I may please invite Mr. Farhan to please come on the stage. to request Mr. Farhan to present the token of gratitude. First up to Mr. Arjun Malik. So I'm going to request you to please present the memento to Mr. Arjun Malik. To Mr. Salil Ranadeve. So I'm going to also request you to remain on stage and present the memento to Mr. Salil Ranadeve. And to Mr. Soumitra Ghosh. As well as to Mr. Soumitra Ghosh. Thank you very much, Mr. Farhan. Thank you. I'm going to now invite Mr. Sameer Kakkar from Legrand, India to please come on the stage to also present the memento. First up, to Ms. Shabnam Gupta. To Mr. Dean De Cruz. And to Ms. Bahar Faki. And to our session moderator, Mr. Puran Kumar. So huge round of applause there for Puran as well. We're talking about design and story, but we love the art of storytelling from Puran himself through this fantastic panel discussion.